Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books. A lot of people keep asking me, why did you want to get rid of Bob Chapek in the first place? Why is he not as good as Bob Iger? What do you think the reason was that he was fired? Give me your 2 cents on it, Mr. Adam Post. Well, I have done a number of videos about this already, kind of piece by piece. I haven't really covered this all as one direct video, and I find I'm getting a lot of comments in my videos. Hey, well, you know, Bob Chapek really didn't greenlight all the projects. He wasn't really responsible for that. It was Bob Iger who was responsible for all the problems. So, you know, you don't really know. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a video, why Bob Chapek was fired, and give you my breakdown as to what I've noticed, what I've researched, and from my experience in business, what I saw wrong about Bob Chapek and why I know he needed to really leave as soon as possible for business purposes. Not that Bob Iger is going to necessarily be better with the brands, although I think he will, but because Chapek was really ruining the business with his clumsy behavior time and time again. So we're going to go over a few different articles. I'm going to give you my 2 cents. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up when you like it. And you know, you guys are great. The channel is growing. I really appreciate you. Okay, first things first. He was fired. This is coming from That Park Place. This is from an SEC filing from the government. They had a file with the government explaining that Bob Chapek was officially fired without cause. Fired, not resigned. And normally you would let an executive resign. It's a normal thing to do in business. It's a normal thing that has been done at Disney before with other executives who have left abruptly, including, let's see, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Michael Ovitz was allowed to resign, Michael Eisner was allowed to resign, Tom Staggs was allowed to resign, Steve McPherson, who was the head of ABC in 2010 amid a sexual harassment investigation, and he was allowed to resign. Now, Peter Rice was fired immediately. Peter Rice, who was a woke guy, he was a woke executive. He was pushing don't say gay stuff. He was pushing all that against Florida. That wasn't probably helpful for Bob Chapek or anyone else at the company. He's the only other guy that got fired, apparently, who was a big executive other than Bob Chapek. And Bob Chapek was the one that fired this guy. Incidentally, this guy is so woke, Peter Rice, and he seems like he is, and, you know, who needs him? Good riddance. The replacement for Peter Rice is Dana Walden, who, from this article, if you remember this story just a couple months ago, Disney Entertainment chief says ABC passes on incredibly well-written scripts because they don't meet the new diversity standards. And specifically, Dana Walden, the replacement for the woke Peter Rice, and sure, he's woke, she's just as woke. Walden admitted that ABC even passed on one show about a white family that would have included a diverse cast of friends and neighbors. Quote, pass. That's not going to get on the air anymore because that's not what our audience wants. That's not a reflection of our audience, and I feel good about the direction we're moving in, she said. That's Dana White. That's Peter Rice. That's his replacement. So, you know, thanks for getting rid of Peter Rice to just give us Dana Walden instead. What good was that? It wasn't good. You know, it causes disruption, and it makes other executives who are at the company and lower level people uncomfortable to see big people fired just kind of out of hand like that. Was Chapek fired that way? Yeah, he kind of was, but it was necessary, and that's what the whole video is about. Now, Chapek didn't have one creative success. Not one. No Mandalorian, no Baby Yoda. I can't find any. Now, I'm sure I could be missing something, so please educate me in the comments below if you've noticed a creative success that added value to the brands that even people like me who've had it with Star Wars, when the first couple of Mandalorians came out, we were like, hey, wait, Star Wars might be back a little bit. This exists because of Bob Iger. But Bob Iger plus or minus, not one project, a creative success that added value or resuscitated any of the brands that I found, that I happened to come up with. But again, I could be missing it. Bob Chapek lost the Reedy Creek district. The Reedy Creek district, you know what that is, and I'll fill you in if you don't. The Reedy Creek Improvement District is the governing jurisdiction and special taxing district for the land of Walt Disney World Resort. It includes 39 square miles within the outer limits of Orange and Osceola counties in Florida. It acts with the same authority and responsibility as a county government. Bob Chapek screwed this up. Now, I've heard people say in comments, oh yeah, but you know, the board told him he had to go tell Florida that. Well, let me tell you, the right CEO would have known how to manage the board and how to manage Florida and how to manage the executives. Okay? This is a really serious thing. It's costing the company millions, but potentially could cost the company billions and billions of dollars because the dissolution means now The loss of the Reedy Creek district, it means that Disney will have to go through the state of Florida for all Walt Disney World related projects it wants to begin and permits it will need. They can't just build onto their beautiful theme parks anymore. They can't just do another theme park. They can't even do stuff with the roads. They can't fix things. They can't control the level of services. They're in a lot of trouble because of this. And this is what Bob Chapek did, not because he's malicious, but because he's an idiot. I mean, there's nothing other way to say it. He may be much smarter than I am, and that's fine. But he blew the relationship. He is not good enough to manage people that this had to come to pass. And this is something that even though Bob Iger is very slick, and he solved the relationship with Pixar and with Steve Jobs, Bob Iger can't fix this on his best day. Because this involves the government. And now DeSantis is going to run for president most likely. He can't give up the political capital to say, oh yeah, I'm going to let Reedy Creek go. I'm going to just settle with them. No. DeSantis won. He has to keep it as a win politically for himself. This is law now. It's been passed in the state. So it's almost impossible to reverse. And Iger has other things to try to fix. Another thing that Chapek did is finally he's increased prices for Disney Plus. Now I'm not, and they have an ad-supported version. Again, finally for Disney Plus that it's going to be released in December. Fine. That's way too far away. It's taken way too long. I'm not saying I want to pay more for Disney Plus. I'm saying from a business standpoint, the revenues don't match the expenses whatsoever. They're being killed on the streaming services. They lost $4 billion last year. $4 billion, and that's with some sneaky accounting tricks, which he did also do. A lot of them do. He got caught. That's another problem he had. If you're losing that kind of money, you need to figure out how you're going to cut your spending, increase your revenues, do whatever else you can do with the accounting. You have to look at maybe our whole library doesn't need to be reserved only for our platforms. We can collect revenue from other licensing sources. They gave up at least $800 million this year in revenue that they could have generated by licensing some of their catalog to other people that are looking for content, but not under Bob Chapek. Similar to Jason Kilar, who's no longer in HBO Max, but not what Chapek wanted to do. So he's way too slow in fixing that incredibly severe problem. With respect to this, I did a whole video about this. I'm not going to get into a big deal with this, but the Wall Street Journal did report a couple of days ago that there were numbers that Bob Chapek was trying to massage. He was trying to say that, oh, let's just take some of these expensive Disney Plus shows and put them on one of our Disney channels on cable. So this way we can pretend that we had marketing and production costs that we can share with our cable division. So it'll make it look like if we lose less money in streaming because we expense some of it in our cable group, we can just get away with that. You know, that's clever and all that, and it's fine, but your CFO has to actually agree to it and be comfortable with it. Now, his CFO ratted him out to the board, and now it's in the Wall Street Journal that she didn't approve really of this. Or maybe she did, but only kind of technically and wasn't really comfortable. Iger may have done the same thing. 100 other executives may do and have done the same thing. Sure, maybe, maybe not. However, when you get to the point that your CFO is ratting you out basically to the board and the Wall Street Journal, you've taken things too far. You don't have a good relationship with your CFO. He's not going to jail. The SEC is not going to look into this, but it absolutely destroys his credibility. It damages the company's credibility. It just makes them look shady. That's not something that they needed to have. They have enough problems without that. You remember how Bob Chapek somehow got into a fight with Scarlett Johansson over that terrible Black Widow movie that did terribly? He did that. He managed to allow things to get out of control with Scarlett Johansson because in a move that I would have agreed with, they did like day and date releases on Disney Plus with Black Widow because all the theaters weren't open and they wanted to capture revenue, but they also wanted to promote Disney Plus. At the time, I think I did a video openly praising the idea. I thought it was a really good idea. The problem is you can't just have a good idea that affects other people and not get on the same page with them, everyone who it affects. So if you're going to generate extra revenue from Disney Plus, or you're at least hoping to, but that means that the box office is going to be less, and that means that your actor, Scarlett Johansson, is going to make less money potentially because you're going to have a lower box office because you're competing with your own streaming service, you got to figure that out privately, not publicly through open arguments with talent. And the reason that matters is because, like, Marvel, it's like a whole universe and stuff. So, like, those actors and the characters, it's all interrelated. You need continuity. You don't need, like, Thor deciding all of a sudden, like, I don't like how they're treating Scarlett Johansson. Or Robert Downey Jr. is now saying, I'm on her side. Whoever's saying whatever, that has to be done privately. Horrible mismanagement of that situation. He raised prices on the theme parks to the point of ridiculousness. Theme parks are a big part of Disney. It's very unique to Disney. Sure, you've got Universal Studios that has theme parks, but the theme parks are something that, like, look, your grandparents have probably been to Disney theme parks. I mean, really, out of this world place that's incredibly special and important for Disney's brands. Yes, you can raise prices, but you need to figure out a way that you're going to raise prices that your core people who love Disney and who've loved and grown up with Disney for decades don't feel insulted. You have to make an argument. You have to make a case. You have to be persuasive. You have to talk about how inflation is really hurting the magical castle or whatever it is that you're going to say. It's not my job to fix it, but it was his job to fix it. So sure, they got some short-term profits, but they've got a lot of people who are very upset about how they raised prices, and also because Chapek has been so desperate to generate extra revenue for Disney because they're losing so much money in streaming and in more than just streaming. That's another thing he did. They're so desperate to raise money that they're doing tricky things that once you're in the park, there are extra expenses of things that used to be free. And then once you're there, you figure, oh, I'm kind of stuck. I have to pay for it. Kind of like going out and getting, stuck buying a lot of drinks, whatever, when you never planned to, whatever. It was Chapek's sneaky connivingness, and again, another thing that he did that greatly upset people. Another thing that Bob Chapek did, when he had the quarterly report that just came out, was talking about their financial results, he was all upbeat and happy about losing $1.5 billion in streaming. Got it to the point where Jim Cramer, and this was almost borderline inappropriate for Jim Cramer to say this, but he said this, live, commenting on Bob Chapek, that the guy was delusional. He had no reason to be happy about their results when they were losing so much money. And this guy, Jim Cramer, he doesn't talk that way very often. He doesn't attack people who are in these important positions very often. But he did here. Now, whether or not that's some conspiracy or because Chapek is really not woke and he's been doing, special things behind the scenes and someone set up Jim Cramer to say, I don't see that. I don't see it because the results were also not public. So maybe there was a conspiracy. The problem is when you lose the respect of major commentators where they think that you're not making sense when you're trying to talk about the company's results and the future that you're promising for the company and saying that he sounds delusional, and that he absolutely has to go as CEO, that's a terrible thing to do and to get things to that point. Of course, the board is thinking about getting rid of him the moment that happens. And that was when apparently from a number of articles I've seen, when Iger started working behind the scenes, it wasn't just on Friday night he got a phone call. It was right after this event that Iger was starting to get back into the picture. But that's not all. 3 days after Bob Chapek made his quarterly report and analysts were shocked. Jim Cramer is shocked. People were incredibly surprised about the terrible losses in streaming. He lets slip through a memo that gets released to Hollywood Reporter that he's doing these massive layoffs, massive restructuring. We've got to cut all these expenses. Well, it's fine to do layoffs. Warner Brothers Discovery does layoffs. I'm a big fan of Warner Brothers Discovery because they're very upfront about what they're trying to do, but also because they do respect their brands. I don't know how Chapek feels about the brands. All I know is there hasn't been anything coming out that's been good for the brands. I haven't seen anything good, even accidentally, come out of Disney since Bob Chapek has been in charge. But you can't have a sneaky secret memo leak as your announcement about having massive layoffs 3 days after having a big quarterly meeting, because you're supposed to mention it at the quarterly meeting so the analysts can ask you detailed questions. It was very cowardly to not talk about it until a couple days later when he still didn't do a release. He let a memo get leaked. Now, maybe someone leaked the memo against him and there's a conspiracy against the wonderful Bob Chapek. He knew the layoffs were coming. His name is on the memo. So he needed to talk about them publicly with the analysts so they could ask questions. And then as a result, executives were upset too because they didn't even know what was and wasn't allowed, because the memo was really strict that they're cutting back and conserving cash, not allowing business travel without hire approval, not allowing people to go and hire anyone. There's a hiring freeze. They're not allowed to go even for business conventions without hire approval. Nothing was set up. Nothing was prepared. I mean, I don't see it as a conspiracy. I see it as he knew this was coming. He didn't announce it publicly. Did you know also he did this massive restructuring with his friend Kareem Daniel? So Kareem Daniel seems like an accomplished guy. He's still young though. And Chapek decided, okay, well, look, we have films we're making. We have TV shows. We have multiple platforms. We have Disney Plus streaming. We have cable channels. We have TV channels. We have all this stuff, theatrical releases. We need to not have competition when there's going to be a decision to make. So when we want to distribute a new movie that comes out from Pixar, what we need to do is, instead of letting the Pixar people make their case and then make a decision, okay, yep, this is going to be a theatrical release, or giving them the authority at Pixar. This is Pixar. You have kind of a good reputation. They sort of know what they're doing with creating content, usually, except some of the recent woke stuff. Usually, Pixar has an excellent record. Chapek decided, no, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to have my friend, Kareem Daniel, because they've known each other since Kareem was an intern, so they really are friends. I'll have him head up a whole distribution unit. So I'll just tell my production companies, make your TV shows, make your movies, give them to Kareem, and he'll make the decision of if it's going to go on a streaming service or it's going to go out theatrically. That'll be up to Kareem. Well, that upset many, many people at the different divisions. And the reason it upset them was because, it's hard to get people to do a great job on a $150, $200 million Pixar movie, for example. They don't even know if it's going to be released theatrically or not. And several of the last ones they didn't release theatrically. So it causes a lot of upset. It's also, what kind of a business plan is that? You ought to know how many movies you want to release theatrically. This is past the pandemic. I mean, this is something that Chapek set up probably before all of the theatrical releases were back in place and all this. But you can't just have Kareem Daniel, who he doesn't have an entertainment background even. He doesn't have sufficient expertise to make these kinds of decisions. And the thing is, Pixar's its own studio. They should be allowed to make theatrical projects if they want to make theatrical projects. This isn't like some small animation house or something like that. And that's what all those execs had to deal with, because Chapek had this brilliant idea. The other thing he did is he created this really devastating transfer price culture. Transfer prices is something I've known about for years. I'll share it with you. Transfer prices is when one part of your company is buying from another part of your company so that your number one customer is really you. Well, if you can imagine, that becomes really inefficient, and it causes a lot of arguments of like, well, what's the value of what you're selling me? Why are you charging me this price? That's not equivalent to the market rate. This is how you get things like 9 episodes of She-Hulk costing $225 million. Or you have 6 episodes of Ms. Marvel costing $200 million. At least from my research. Moon Knight, 6 episodes, $160 million. $160 million for Moon Knight? Could you have sold that to another network? Would Netflix have paid that kind of money for She-Hulk? I would doubt it. The last deal that they did with Netflix in 2014 wasn't anything like that. It had a budget of like $3 million an episode, $8 million on Defenders. So no, it's now become a complete disaster because of not being careful about expenses, incorporating in these transfer prices, restricting the ability to license content, that you have excess content because you don't need all of your content on all of your outlets at all the time. Sometimes Netflix or another streaming service needs some of your lower end content more than you do. So the idea of trying to starve the marketplace really, as Zaslav says from Warner Bros. Discovery, really doesn't make any good common sense. That's essentially my rundown. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please educate me where you think I'm wrong. I'd like to see it. I had someone telling me earlier, Adam, you don't understand. Bob Chapek has only been the CEO since February 2022, so everything was greenlit under Bob Iger. And I was like, how could that be right? So I did a little Googling, and no, that's not the case at all. Chief Executive Officer of Disney was Bob Chapek in February 2020. It's true that Iger didn't leave as, executive chairman, whatever his title was, but Iger wasn't doing the decisions about what projects they were going to make. He had a role. He's supporting people and having conversations. But Chapek was steamrolling and just doing whatever he wanted to do in the interim. In fact, I found in this article talking about firing Peter Rice, which, woke guy, whatever, let's get rid of him, but put somebody else just as woke or more in his place. And I don't know what good that does. But whatever, they put him in his place. They replaced him. Peter Rice was given greenlit authority on making projects by Bob Chapek. So it wasn't Bob Iger who was greenlighting all of the mediocre content that Disney's been putting out in these last couple of years. It was Bob Chapek and Bob Chapek's people that he put in charge. Let me know what you think of this in the comments below. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up, and I will see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.